So in this section, we're going to be talking about terrestrial biomes, and terrestrial biomes are those that occur on land. That's what terrestrial means. And when we look at these types of ecosystems, we usually look at the biotic and the abiotic factors that affect these things. So biotic factors are the living things like the plants and the animals and the bacteria and the fungus. And then the abiotic factors are the non-living things that affect the area, like the temperature or the soil quality or the heat or the sunlight or the rain or the water. And each biome, and there's a good picture of this in your book, has different levels of productivity. So based on their lines of latitude, you can almost see that there's patterns across the earth. Like here on the equator, you'll see more rainforest, just above and just below. And then you can almost see like here, you'll see more of the temperate grasslands. The gray you will see as deserts, and they tend to occur in the same places. Above that, you'll see some of the boreal and the temperate forests, and then very top you will end up seeing tundra. And the first one that we're going to talk about that everybody loves, and it's one of my favorites, is the tropical rainforest. So the tropical rainforests have very little changes throughout the year, and that occurs because of where they are on the map. They just are in a very constant place for sun during the year, and so their temperature ends up being between about 68 and 93 during the year, although when I was in Borneo studying, it was definitely over 100 the whole time that I was there. And so it just depends. But they do get a great deal of rain. They get between 8 and almost 15 feet of rain per year. So one thing that's very important to know about rainforests is a lot of the water that is accumulated in the rainforest is actually comes from the leaves that are very waxy, and they tend to be very large, and there's just billions of them in a rainforest, and they actually will act almost like glass, that when the cloud cover comes and sits on the rainforest, the water from the clouds will actually condense on the leaves like glass and will make droplets. And then a lot of the leaves have a central vein like this, or large veins that they will actually dip and pour the rain off and down into little rivers and streams. And that is where the rainforest gets a lot of their water. In fact, different studies are being done on this, but I've heard some estimates that say conservatively, most leaves are producing about a quarter cup of water per leaf per day in the rainforest. So you can look up more information on that, and we'll see how those studies go over time. But essentially, a lot of the liquid in the rainforest is coming from the condensation on leaves, which then becomes a problem when you end up deforesting and cutting down the rainforest. It can often very quickly turn into desert-like conditions because it wasn't the rain so much that was coming down, it was more the condensation that the leaves were gathering that made that such a wet place. So when you cut down the trees, there's nothing really to grab the liquid out of the air to make it a less arid place. So where I did a lot of my research was in Borneo, and here's a picture of it from like 1960, and this looks like a coyote or something that's running with a cape is what I think Borneo looks like. But in 1960, here was the forestation there, and then over time, about 70 or so years later, this is what it looks like now. So it's pretty sad, like how much. And as I flew in and flew over, you would see tons of areas like this where it had been abruptly deforested. So when you see something that says Malaysian wood or something like that, it is coming from Borneo, and this is where it's coming from. Additionally, if you ever wanted to follow on social media a really cool field station, this is the one that I got to go and work from, was Danu Garang, and they have great social media. that you could follow and see some of the animals that they're seeking to preserve, like the sun bear or the tarsier or the pangolin, or here's even a proboscis monkey, but they have this awesome pygmy elephant that I don't even feel like anybody really knows about it, but it's a very tiny elephant that's about the size of an adult human. It's pretty small, and the babies are like knee high. They're very cute. So follow them on social media if you are interested in seeing the conservation efforts that are really happening in places like this. So because there's so much rain in the rainforest, what ends up happening is the soil is actually leached into the water that falls actually leaches out the nutrients. So the soil is very low nutrients, and the main source of getting energy is coming from the sun. Again, where it is on that space on the earth, gives it a lot of sunlight. So that's the main level of productivity. But when you have a lot of sunlight and then you take away the plants and the way of its method of getting water, then it just becomes a quick desert. So we have to be really careful with that land use and what we're doing there, and work on sustainability. So the next area that I wanted to talk about are the savannas. And savannas they only get their temperatures are between like 75 8 and 84. They can get 20 to 50 inches of rain every year. They often have little fires and a lot of small growing plants. So it looks a lot like what you saw, if you ever watched The Lion King as a little kid and loved it, a lot of it looks like that, with very few trees, a lot of grasses. One of my favorite trees in Africa is actually the acacia tree. The acacia tree is just gorgeous, and it's very iconic for Africa. And the acacia tree will actually try to preserve itself by having very long thorns. But then when giraffes will come and eat it, it actually has a method of releasing a gas from its leaves to warn other trees around it that, hey, I'm being over harvested. And the other trees will respond by actually releasing a lot of tannins, which is a very bitter tasting chemical, into their leaves to get the giraffes to go away and to stop eating it so that it's not eaten too much. So it's an interesting research study that you can look into if you are interested that, oh my goodness, the plants are communicating with each other. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at are deserts. And deserts also have to be really well adapted for their area. Deserts have very low rainfall and extreme temperatures. Their plants have very deep roots so that they can get water. If you look at aerial views, and I didn't bring one up, I apologize, but if you look at aerial views of deserts, their plants are almost very perfectly evenly spaced, as if it was planned by a gardener. And that is so that the plants can actually each get a lot of water. They don't group up next to each other. So the animals that live in the desert generally get all of their water from the things that they eat, and then the plants are very well adapted to not lose very much water through transpiration and gather it very quickly. I know that I talked about cactus before, but the cactus will actually have a very waxy outside, needles to protect them, and then the inside is very sponge-like. So when it rains, it will soak up the water faster than anything around it. Another tree that I think is really cool in the desert is actually called the Palo Verde. And Palo Verde actually has a very, when it's younger anyways, it has a very green stalk or tree trunk. And that's because the tree trunk is actually photosynthesizing. And it's doing that so that even if it loses all of its leaves, it can still get energy by having its trunk photosynthesize, which is really cool. In the desert, there's a lot of things that are endemic. And endemic means that it is found there and nowhere else in the world. So, in California, Southern California, we have, for instance, like the Catalina Island fox, where it's found here and nowhere else in the world. Or also in Catalina, which is a little chaparral it's like chaparral-like, not quite a desert, but there is like a Catalina ironwood. So remember that word endemic. So deserts generally have less than a foot of rain per year, and it can be very sporadic. So this is actually another interesting thing. This is a barrel cactus. Barrel cactuses actually generally face south. So when you find these in the desert, you can almost know where you are by the direction the barrel cactus is facing. And it will do that so that one side of it kind of will get burned, but its flower and other things will actually be, the main growth will be on the underneath of the plant and shaded throughout its life. So it's a really interesting cactus, and if you start to look around in a desert place, you'll see that they're all tend to be pointing the same way, which is south. Okay, so we are going to move on to chaparral. And chaparral is just like California. We are in a chaparral, and it's pretty common here. Chaparrals have mild winters, and then it has hot, dry summers, and the landscapes are dominated by small shrubs and grasses. So they're pretty prone to fire, and in California, we have actually increased fires a lot over the last several years. So interestingly, from here's something from the New York Times. We had from 2001 to 2010, so in that grouping of years, we burned 7 million acres. But from 2011 to 20, we have burned 10 million acres. And since 2020 has started, we've burned 3.2 million. So in just half of a year at the making of this video, we have burned almost all that we did in, almost half of what we did in 10 years, 2 decades ago. So the fires in California are increasing almost exponentially. And then you have to look at like heat maps. I don't know if it will show it on this, but heat maps of California are increasing, and maybe they're not, maybe I didn't put it on here. I wish that I would have, or maybe it had it and I can't find it. But at any rate, if you look at heat maps, we actually have some very hot places that were really contributing to very high temperatures in our area by doing things like adding concrete everywhere and by adding like just roads everywhere. We've made it very hot. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about are temperate grasslands. And temperate grasslands have very low rainfall. And this is, even though they have a very low rainfall, this is enough for grasses to grow, but not for trees. And because it dries out in the summer, it is also susceptible to fires like the chaparral. And there's lots of herd animals that graze on these grasses. They get between 10 and 35 inches of rain a year. A lot of grasses have underground stems called rhizomes, where they just send out runners. And they tend to have cold winters. A lot of times the fires are starting from lightning strikes that happen in the area. So one of the great animals that lived in our temperate grasslands was the American bison, and it had, before the 1800s, there were about 60 million of them in the United States, 60 million of them, well, in North America. And now it got as low as only 541 animals left in 1889. So we went, in about 100 years, we killed 60 million bison in about 100 years. It's pretty sad. And so we got down to 541 in the United States by 1889. And then today they have bred and come up to 360,000. So that's again where you would see like a genetic bottleneck where they don't quite have the gene diversity that they used to. Interestingly, there was this cool image here, and this was actually taken in 1887 where they took a different photos of a bison running and made it into a little movie, which I just thought was really cool. Some documentation. So the next one that we are going to look at is the Boreal Forests, and I think, okay, there's, oh, I didn't do temperate forests. I need to do temperate forests first. Okay, so based on where they are in the United States, on their latitude, we have a lot of areas that are perfect for growing broad-leafed temperate forests. And in order to survive the winters, these trees will usually get rid of all of their leaves, and then their leaves go down and actually keep their roots warm on the forest floor. So they almost act as a blanket. So in the summer, they really help them gather a lot of energy. And then in the winter, they help keep the tree alive by acting as leaf litter to keep the roots warm. And the summers are often warm and rainy here. There's not that many evergreen trees. It goes from minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit to about 86. They have a long freeze period every year. The trees don't grow as tall as what they do in tropical rainforest, and so because of this leaf litter that falls every year, they actually do have a lot of nutrients in the soil, and this also helps stop erosion and, like I said, make different insulation for the trees. And it's just a really pretty place. The people that love fall, this is what they're always thinking about. Okay. So the next one is called the Boreal Forests, and these are also, the Boreal Forests are also sometimes called the taiga, and it's a coniferous forest, meaning it has a lot of conifers, and they have long cold winters and short summers, short and wet summers. Because the area is frozen in the winter and dry during the summer, the plants usually have leaves that are waxy to conserve water, and usually the needles are really pointy. A pointy needle doesn't take a lot of sunlight to warm up, so this can actually get warm in the summer. So where do these places exist that are so kind of cold and frozen like this? They actually, it's a lot in Canada, Alaska, Russia, Northern Europe is where these places are. So they usually get only between about 15 and 39 inches of rain every year. And so we are going to, oh, and they have a lot of nitrogen. A lot of their leaves and plants are very nitrogen rich themselves. There's not a lot of the nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil here. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is the Arctic tundra. And the tundra is located between the polar and coniferous zones, and they have extremes in their seasons. And they have something called permafrost. Because the ground is always frozen, the plant life is limited to growing shrubs, lichens, mosses. Permafrost, by the way, is actually just that, just like what the name sounds. It's permanently frozen ground. So even when looks like it's not frozen, maybe the first couple of feet of the ground is not frozen, even in the warmest part of the year. But you go, I think I've heard about 3 to 6 feet down, and it will be completely frozen. And this is why in some ways, trees and things that cannot grow. Anything with deep roots can't really grow because it's permanently frozen down below. So during the summer, the days are extremely long because there's a ton of sunlight. If you've ever been to like northern Canada, you've actually seen this. During the winter, the nights are really long and there's only a little bit of sunlight. And because of the long summer daylight, the summer is actually the productive time for the plant life, and it's also the breeding ground for a lot of migratory birds that travel up to this area for thousands of miles to reach it. So permafrost, by the way, does melt a little in the summer on the top of the ground, but like I said, if you dig a few feet down, it will be frozen. There's another type of tundra called the Alpine Tundra. So Alpine tundras are tiny little micro areas of tundra that occur because there's a really, really high mountain that's a lot cooler on the top. So it'll kind of have its own mini tundra at the top of the mountain, even though down below on the valley floor, it's not really like a tundra, but up at the very top of the mountain, there is the permafrost where it stays year round. So, an alpine tundra, which means at the top, it's at the top of the mountain. It has some kinds of conditions that are like a tundra year round, with that are icy cold winds, have very few plants, and most of the living things are like mosses and lichens.